Thank you very much. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers, and we'll add 1 minute to the end of question period. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, about 6 weeks ago, Nova Scotians learned that the current CEO of the Nova Scotia Health Authority will be stepping away at the end of the summer. This gave the province about 6 months to recruit a new CEO. At the time of the announcement, the board of the Nova Scotia Health Authority committed to beginning the executive search in the coming weeks. My question for the Premier is, 6 weeks later, has an executive search been started to find a new CEO of the Nova Scotia Health Authority?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as you would know, Mr. Speaker, the board that will be doing that search and that work is ongoing.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The challenges that we're facing in the healthcare system have been well reported in this House. Tens of thousands without a family doctor, ER closures, insufficient long-term care beds, ambulance backups, and code critical, tough conditions, and an inflexible administration that in many people's eyes is chasing healthcare professionals away from the province. Mr. Speaker, we learned last week that 9 of 10 nurses are concerned about their ability to safely provide appropriate care for their patients. My question to the Premier is, how would the Premier characterize the last 5 years of healthcare under the new health authority?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable for the question. It gives me an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to talk about the transformation in healthcare. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is we had 9 district health authorities. We had siloed services across the province, depending where you live. We now have one system where there's been challenges associated, Mr. Speaker, accessing primary care, but many of it's being attributed to the fact around the administrative side, Mr. Speaker. The amalgamation of the administration provided us with savings. The reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, the access to primary care challenge was long before that. Mr. Speaker, you can go back to the mid-2000s, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the reality of it is the changes we're making are providing access to primary care better. The honourable member just stood in his place and said tens of thousands. It was only a few months ago, Mr. Speaker, they were using hundreds of thousands to go to a physician. The fact of the matter is, lives are getting better. We know there's still more work to do, and we're going to continue to do that.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Every time you show some kindness to the Premier, he misinterprets it. There's close to 100,000 Nova Scotians without a family doctor. Well, everyone knows that, Mr. Speaker. The Premier is the only one in the province that won't accept the crisis that we have in healthcare. Anytime there is a change at the top of an organization, there's an opportunity for the organization to take stock of the direction and determine if there's a need to adjust course. I think even the most generous observer of healthcare, of the healthcare amalgamation, which we don't know what the savings are, if any, Mr. Speaker, when it's all said and done. I think even the most generous observer of the healthcare amalgamation would have characterized the last 5 years as bumpy. The current CEO came from a clinical background within the healthcare system, but the challenges we face today may call for a different set of skills, like something more management-driven with more of an emphasis on technology and workforce planning. And my question for the Premier is, has the Premier taken the time? Has the Premier gotten involved in any full assessment of the future of the Nova Scotia Health Authority to determine how to identify the proper direction under new leadership?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, the reality of it is, over the last 5 years, we've seen an historic investment in infrastructure across the province. $2 billion, Mr. Speaker, invested in the infrastructure, providing primary care across the province. I know at the Health Committee, which is the first one which is ever put together by a government in the history of this province to allow the health care to be said. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the opposition members in that committee said that the Cape Breton redevelopment is a good thing. I hope they go back to their communities and continue to communicate that, Mr. Speaker. Now that they presented the facts, I hope they take the facts back instead of sitting in a committee and saying it here. Do it in your communities. Let's all of us come together to bring people together when we know we're doing the right thing when it comes to healthcare infrastructure in this province.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Over the course of the last few weeks, as the Premier and I have debated about the economy, sometimes it has occurred to me that anyone listening to us might wonder if we're even talking about the same object. I've spoken repeatedly about the prevalence of hunger and about the inadequacy of incomes for people to be able to pay their rent and their power. And the Premier has talked about other indicators which support his view that things are going in the right direction. But there is, Mr. Speaker, only one economy, and none of its central features should be obscured or swept aside. So I want to ask the Premier, does he think it is a matter of major economic significance, as I do, that Nova Scotia has the lowest median income today of any province in the country?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we continue to make...
Order, please. I'd like to remind the guests in the gallery that you're not permitted to display any signs. We'll ask the security staff to escort them out, and the House will now recess for a couple of minutes. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with the honourable member.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
That we have the last meeting.
Mr. Speaker, without a recognition of the significance of fundamental economic indicators, it's extremely difficult for us to make any serious economic headway. So I want to ask the Premier if he acknowledges the facts that Nova Scotia has the fastest rising food bank use of any province in the country, that we have the highest incidence of food insecurity of any province in the country, and that we have the most serious incidence of child poverty that exists in any province in Canada today.
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, again, I want to thank the honourable member for the issue he's raised. It's an all-important one. It's why we continue to make adjustments, Mr. Speaker. Oftentimes, opposition will isolate one particular aspect, whether it's minimum wage, where it's income assistance, as opposed to look at the totality of options that people have. The honourable member would know, up until our government, child maintenance was part of how you assessed income security for families, or used as income individual families. That no longer happens, Mr. Speaker. We continue to work to make sure that we can provide a myriad of options when it comes to housing and how do we continue to support them. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, the pre-primary program is providing options for play-based, evidence-based for all 4 years in the province that allow caregivers to get back into the workforce as we continue to support. And I want to tell the honourable member, we do not think the issue around making sure that all of our citizens have all the opportunities is solved. We know there's still more work to do, and we're going to continue to do it.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier in his answer has failed to recognize the significance of the fact that in all of these areas, whether we're talking about median income or whether we're talking about child poverty, that in all of these areas, we're not even close to the national average, nor are we 7th or 8th or 9th, that in every one of these areas, we are 10th out of 10, the dead, rock, rotten bottom last. Mr. Speaker, if I were the Premier at the 5.5-year mark and the people I served were the poorest in the country, and that was true particularly of their children, I would examine myself and I would wonder seriously where it was over that 5.5 years that I had fallen short. So I want to ask the Premier, does he register any sense of failure that on so many of these major economic indicators, the people he serves are at the very bottom?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable for the question. Mr. Speaker, I listened to the honourable member, and I know he was a member of a government, Mr. Speaker, that signed some of the richest collective agreements in our province's history, Mr. Speaker. That means, Mr. Speaker, those that are doing well are doing even better, Mr. Speaker. And
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, the reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, they can continue to yell if they like. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, they signed some of the richest collective agreements in this province's history, Mr. Speaker, at the same time ignored vulnerable Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. I want to tell the honourable member, we signed collective agreements that we can afford, that the honourable member voted against, so that we can continue.
Please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I want to continue to remind the honourable member we signed collective agreements that this province can afford, so we can invest in the very people that were ignored when the NDP were in government, Mr. Speaker. We have a free primary, Mr. Speaker, for every 4-year-old, regardless of the socioeconomic circumstances born into they will go to, Mr. Speaker. We can invest in the healthcare infrastructure that was ignored by the New Democratic Party, Mr. Speaker. And if there's one thing I want to tell the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, I can look every Nova Scotian in the face, Mr. Speaker, after being the Premier of this province for 5.5 years, and tell them I never left any of them behind.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of leaving people behind, my question is to the Premier. In the last few weeks, we have had 3 former members of this House come forward and raise serious questions about the conduct of the Minister of Education and Childhood Development. The Premier has said that if any member had come forward with concerns, he would take the matter seriously. They might be former members, but there are 3 members who have come forward with accusations. So my question to the Premier is, has the Premier made any attempt to contact any of the 3 former members of this legislature who have written and spoken publicly on these accusations to better understand their stories?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member know, Mr. Speaker, those former members wrote directly to you, Mr. Speaker, CC'd all of us. As they would also know, this chamber falls under the office of the Speaker. I told the honourable member in this House repeatedly what I have continued to do. Mr. Speaker, spoke to the member, Mr. Speaker. I can also tell you those letters said that I was told, Mr. Speaker, in 2013. That is not accurate.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, it seems repeatedly that the Premier would prefer that this issue went away rather than addressing it. The Premier has spoken of the regard that he has for these former colleagues, but I don't understand why he will not reach out to hear their stories. If he, as our Premier, took these issues seriously, I would believe he would want to get the details before he dismisses this and goes to great attempts to assure us that he didn't know. He does know now. My question to the Premier, is the Premier not calling these former MLAs because he's worried about what he'll hear, or will he commit today to reaching out to them?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to clarify the honourable member's statement. At no point have I dismissed, Mr. Speaker, what was brought to you. That was also CC'd to myself and the other leaders, Mr. Speaker. I told this House the following morning I had my assistant who's been with me since 2008 continue to look through all the correspondence. Did any correspondence come from those 2 members or the former leader? The former 2 leaders, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, because it also was alleged one of these happened under the former Premier, New Democratic Premier, as well as the interim leader. There was none, Mr. Speaker. I also went and searched through my own constituency emails to find out if there had been any. Mr. Speaker, there were no, Mr. Speaker, there was no correspondence to me. And I've also said to the honourable member, at no point has anyone said to me that there was a physical contact between any member of my government and those members.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. In 2011, then Health Minister Dave Wilson launched Nova Scotia's first autism spectrum disorder plan. Our government committed to doubling the provincial investment in the EIBI program as it stood then and adding new funding for those who needed to hire additional care for their children to keep them safe at home, among other commitments. The action plan was about more than just early intervention, though. It sketched a roadmap for meeting the needs of people with ASD across the lifespan. However, in the 8 years since that plan was released, there has been no update on the status of the Autism Spectrum Disorder Action Plan. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier commit to tabling an updated action plan for meeting the needs of people with ASD across the lifespan?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the Minister of Health to respond.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for the question. As the member knows, we're in Autism Acceptance Month this month, so it's a very timely question to bring to the floor. We've certainly been listening and advancing improvements in supports for people living with autism spectrum disorder, but also for their family members and loved ones. So we continue to advance in this area and support investments to provide new programs and services and supports based upon feedback that we continue to receive from organizations like Autism Nova Scotia.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, addressing the needs of autistic and neurodivergent individuals requires participation across departments and structures and systems. It needs a plan. Autism advocates need to know that the government has considered how different programs are set up to support or exclude autistic people. Too many people have had to make their stories public in order to get the support that they need and deserve. We should be doing the work now to make sure the services are readily available when they're needed. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier or the Minister of Health agree to conduct an audit of services across all departments through an autism lens?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we have been working, certainly the three departments most engaged with programs and supports in this area include the Department of Education, the Department of Community Services and the Department of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, we have engaged and have our staff working, I believe, closer together than they have in the past to do just that, to look at the programs and supports when community members or family members are in periods of concern or crises, to ensure that we say what is the suite of programs and supports within all of our departments to come in behind and support them. But in addition to that, we're investing in new programs like the recently announced Brief Intensive Outreach Service program, Mr. Speaker, which brings, again, a multidisciplinary group of people to go out into the community or homes to support families and individuals so that they don't reach a point of crisis and they get the supports they need in the area that makes the most sense for them.
The Honourable Member for Argyle-Barrington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yarmouth Regional Hospital is now down to one anaesthetist for 55,000 people living in Yarmouth, Digby, and Shelburne counties. I'd raised the matter a month ago, and the departures discussed have now come to pass. The NSHA is attempting to recruit another anaesthetist, but there's no clarity on when that might happen. An editorial yesterday in the Chronicle Herald observed that anaesthetists are critical to surgical procedures and that surgeons won't hang around for long at a hospital where they can't perform surgery. And I'll table that article. My question for the Minister: does he appreciate the concerns that constantly having to backfill specialist positions is the new normal?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, we appreciate the concerns when vacancies arise, particularly in specialist areas within our healthcare system. But that's why recruitment does continue within these areas. As the member noted, there is an existing candidate that's been identified that they're working through that process to fill that spot and continue with additional vacancies. But also, Mr. Speaker, they also have locum supports, temporary supports to continue to provide the anaesthetist supports at the hospital with a particular eye to ensure urgent and critical benchmarks continue to be maintained at that site.
The Honourable Member for Argyle-Barrington.
While I appreciate the thought of sending down locums tends to be a stopgap, we know that it will not fill the 4 positions that Yarmouth is funded for. Even under the 3, it was difficult to make things work. Under 1 with a possible locum still makes it very difficult. It puts Yarmouth Regional in a very dire spot. Clinicians and staff are concerned about surgeries in the event that the lone anaesthetist, and there might not be a locum available, gets sick in the coming weeks. They are worried that women in labour may need to be redirected to Bridgewater and even Kentville. And we know that pregnancies don't necessarily end on time. That emergency C-sections or planned C-sections might end up happening. My question to the Minister is, does the Minister agree that the anaesthetist crisis at Yarmouth Regional is evidence that incentives and recruitment efforts at the NSHA may need to go back to the drawing board?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I'd indicated previously, we do have, the NSHA does have a candidate that is in the process, Mr. Speaker. My understanding there is that they're going through an immigration process, Mr. Speaker, that the work and the availability is there to fill that position. That will help, Mr. Speaker, while we continue with the NSHA to do the recruitment process to fill the positions. And we look at other initiatives, Mr. Speaker, to help address and support anaesthetists throughout the province.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. We know the Auditor General's recent report was definitely overshadowed by this government's budget. The report makes it very clear, however, that this Liberal government has failed Nova Scotians. The Nova Scotia Health Authority implemented only 50% of the AG's 2016 recommendations, and I will table that. The biggest failure has been the neglect of this government to tell Nova Scotians what to expect from the healthcare system in terms of services delivered in hospitals, such as where to go for services that were previously offered at the VG. Nobody knows where to go. So my question to the Minister, will he admit that his department and the NSHA have failed Nova Scotians by not implementing this crucial recommendation?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member would know, in the report, it does, I believe, have a benchmark that the AG was looking for on a 2-year period. Mr. Speaker, I believe the data in the report also shows that on a 3-year period we were meeting those goals. So, Mr. Speaker, while I appreciate that we aren't achieving the objective that the AG had highlighted on the 2-year period, as a department we continue to work to implement the recommendations. And as far as providing more information to the general public through the Health Authority and the department, we continue to do that and make progress, including recently updated wait times information that highlights both the expectations as well as how they're performing against those expectations for things like mental health, the only jurisdiction in the country that makes that information available for the entire province.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
The reality is, Mr. Speaker, people don't know where to go and people are not getting the services that they need. This Department of Health and Wellness completed only 4 of the 10 recommendations from the AG's 2016 report. It is 2019. No wonder we continue to find ourselves in a healthcare crisis. No wonder healthcare workers continue to scream for help. No one is taking charge in this province, but we all know who should be. So I will ask the Minister, does he agree that by keeping his distance and not holding the NSHA and the department accountable, he too is neglecting to do his job?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We continue to invest in our healthcare system. We continue to invest in programs and sports. And, Mr. Speaker, we continue to provide supports and direction to the Health Authority when appropriate. The most recent example, Mr. Speaker, would be around emergency departments and offloads between paramedics and the hospital system, Mr. Speaker. A very clear direction, very clear expectations, and very clear progress and efforts being made within the Health Authority to address that concern.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. Earlier this month, NSHA issued a work-life balance survey to the employees. Surprisingly, though, it was removed just shortly after being sent to all the employees. And we often wonder why. The NSGEU picked up the torch and launched its own survey, and I will table that survey, and the results are alarming. They're bone-chilling, Mr. Speaker. 93% of nurses say patients are being put at risk due to working shortages. So my question is simple. Would the minister agree?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The work environment continues to be an area of attention for the Health Authority. They continue with the recruitment initiatives, Mr. Speaker, and as part of government's initiatives, Mr. Speaker, we continue to support the expansion of training opportunities for healthcare professionals, including nurses, Mr. Speaker. Just last year, the addition of 25 additional nurse practitioner seats. We've expanded the training opportunities for physicians,
Order,
Mr. Speaker.
Please. The Honourable Minister of Health has the floor.
We continue, Mr. Speaker, to support these opportunities to ensure there are more people in the workforce available to fill vacancies throughout the healthcare system to help improve that work-life balance.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
280 74 vacancies right now for nurses in this province. Wow. Everyone feel good about that? Because I don't. So clearly, due to the lack of safe, proper nurse-patient ratio and staffing shortages, patient care is absolutely in jeopardy. And this reality is weighing heavily on our nurses, creating more stress and an unsafe working environment. The Premier and the Minister of Health and Wellness have been invited to shadow a nurse and experience firsthand what nurses are dealing with every day. So I would like to know, will the Minister confirm if the Premier and himself have accepted this invitation?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member noted in the question the number of vacancies for nursing positions, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to advise the member that, in fact, in 2019, we're anticipating a much larger, I think approximately 20 to 24% increase in the number of RN graduates in nursing programs in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. And I'm quite confident that there will be jobs for each of those nurses here in the province of Nova Scotia to work to their full scope of practice, Mr. Speaker, to provide care to Nova Scotians and help address those vacancies at the
So just before we move on to the next question, this will be the last time I'll call order for the decorum. The next time I have to call it, the member will be excused. The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Environment. Yesterday, the minister declared that consultations with Siboney First Nations around the development of the Alton gas site have been, in her words, sufficient. This, Mr. Speaker, is just the latest in a series of decisions that the government has made around consultation with Indigenous peoples. In every case, the government has sided with corporations and against Indigenous peoples' rights to protect the land and waters of their historic and, I must say, unceded territories. So my question for the minister, how are people to trust her decisions when in every instance the minister has sided with corporations over people?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have to disagree with the premise of that question. Certainly, recent decisions that have been made shows that we're always siding on the side of science and approved evidence, Mr. Speaker. And for the inference that I don't care about the river and I don't care about what happens to it, that's certainly not true either. You know, I lived on the Shubenacadie River most of my life. My family revolved around it, farming along the banks of the Shubenacadie River. You know, it's very important to me too. So that's why I had to make sure in coming up with any of these decisions that I knew the water would be protected. And all of that was based on science and evidence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's so important to the minister. However, this has never been done before. Taking salt from the salt caverns and dumping them into a river has never been done before by this company or any other. So this is the first time, and Nova Scotians are the guinea pigs here. So yesterday, the minister said the Shubenacadie River is sacred and that she once shared the concerns of the Mi'kmaq water protectors. Actually, I'll table that. Now the minister is saying that, and I quote, the science and available evidence spoke to her, and so she therefore feels that dumping millions of liters of salt brine into the river will have no impact. Mr. Speaker, in the tradition of the Mi'kmaq people, humans must always consider the impact of their actions on the next 7 generations. We only get one shot here to get it right. So my question for the minister is, how is she going to assure Nova Scotians that a vital river, a sacred river that runs all the way from the Bay of Fundy to Halifax Harbour will be protected for the next 7 generations?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, I can agree that I did have some concerns when this first came about on my round 1 environment. But I made sure, Mr. Speaker, that I researched all the material myself, that I saw what was brought forward. And there was proof brought by the company on the...
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of the Environment has the floor. The Honourable Member for Truro, Millbrook, Bible Hill, Salmon River will excuse herself. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, the science was brought before me, and I actually went through all the...
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River will excuse herself.
Shane.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to assure all members of this House and all Nova Scotians that these decisions are not taken lightly, Mr. Speaker. We actually make sure that we have all the science and the best evidence before any decisions are made. We know that my role as a Minister of Environment is about protecting the environment. I take that very seriously today and every day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Our schools are supposed to be a safe haven, and I believe they are here in Nova Scotia, but we can do better. How can we do that? Well, every school in this province are equipped with fire alarms, sprinklers, and other safeguards. Staff and students practice fire drills, lockdowns, and other evacuations. My question for the Premier is, does the Premier believe a basic level of first aid or medical attendance should be able to be administered by all staff in this great province of Nova Scotia for our students?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, I believe our schools should be safe in all levels, as the Honourable Member just referred to earlier today. There was a bill tabled where a young man's education was impacted by having to move from one school to the other without a defibrillator. I think we need to make sure, as we go through this process, to all of our schools have the appropriate level of supports that are required to provide the services to all of our children.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Premier for the response. With varied health issues challenging all Nova Scotians, and as we may know, many health problems do not dictate age or discriminate. Does the Premier believe every school in Nova Scotia should be equipped with an AED as another safeguard for our students in this province? Thank you.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. I know he would know from the activity today there are schools that currently have those based on the student population. I know there was a bill tabled. I want to commend both the young man who came in along with his brother, who was providing support along with his parents. I know that the Minister of Education will look at that bill, whether it's this session or future, to make sure that if it's required, that those supports are there. But we need to continue to make sure that all of our places are safe. I think the Honourable Member from Victoria County presented a bill that was before around defibrillators was moved through, and I can assure the Honourable Member for Cumberland South that the bill that was tabled today will get a serious look.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, as recently as last night, I had the opportunity to talk to a doctor in my community who has retired. And of course, the question came up about what do we do about getting more doctors? How do we go about that? How do we retain them? And the discussion came down to what his belief was and what many of his peers' belief is, that indeed, with this current government and the department, that doctors are not given the respect, nor are they asked for their input on how to do this job properly. So, Mr. Speaker, the question to you, to the Minister, how does he respond to that?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question brought forward by the member. I can assure the member that, in fact, we have the utmost respect for physicians and other healthcare providers throughout the system, and do solicit and receive input and feedback from them. Just a few examples, Mr. Chair. We've added the position and have both people with nursing and physician expertise sitting on the board of the Health Authority. We also, Mr. Speaker, and in the member's own community, when I was down in Cape Breton, had meetings at all of the hospitals, basically open meetings with physicians within those communities to hear that feedback. Mr. Speaker, again, I assure the member I continue to listen. We have staff on the front lines as well, engage in those conversations to help inform the steps that we take.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for his attempt to answer the question. But the reality is, frontline healthcare workers, doctors in the province of Nova Scotia, do not believe that they had the proper input and are not being listened to. The other thing is that he tells us about all of these committees that these individuals are put onto. But the question I would ask, are they elected by their peers or are they appointed by the government? because when they're appointed by their peers and elected by their peers, then they are bringing forward the information that the peers want heard by this government. So, Mr. Speaker, does this government do exit interviews, and do they allow elections of individuals to take place so that they can be a part of the solution and not the answer?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member, I believe, indirectly made a point that I've made on the floor of the legislature in response to previous questions. That is, Mr. Speaker, that in fact not everyone within the same field necessarily have the same opinions or suggestions to move forward. That, Mr. Speaker, is one of the reasons why it's challenging, where every time we indicate that we've listened to frontline healthcare workers, that we've taken their advice to perform an action, that the opposition find themselves in a position to find someone else in the healthcare system to say we haven't taken their advice to move their interests forward. But, Mr. Speaker, I assure you we do consider all of the information that comes forward that we hear from healthcare professionals, and we use that information to inform the decisions we make to move forward in what we believe is the right course to improve healthcare services across the province.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Speaker, in January, I put up a Facebook post to solicit support for Dr. Jeannie McGilvray. 1,500 people commented in support of her. The public wants her. I've heard countless stories from people who felt the care they received from her was special, over and above what they expected. She's a great doctor with a great reputation as a surgeon. She was forced to resign because she was put on call without her knowledge when she was out of town, and she could have lost her medical license had she not shown up. What it was really about was a refusal by the Minister's Health Authority to discuss 6 proposals she had put forward to create a better work-life balance. She would take her fair share of call work based on the % surgeon position she was allocated. The Minister knew about this too because he met with her in his constituency office last fall. Why has he done nothing to help her?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That assertion would be inaccurate, and I hope the member can appreciate that I don't speak about individual employment circumstances on the floor of the legislature, but I can assure the member that his statement and assertion there is not correct.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
For the record, Mr. Speaker, Dr. McGilvray feels the Minister's Health Authority press release was inaccurate. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, Antigonish has lost 10 doctors over the past year, yet the people of Antigonish are represented by the Minister of Health. That doesn't make sense. One would think if the Minister of Health was representing them, they could at least be able to count on him to look after their local hospital. Not so. Why did these doctors leave? More money and less call work elsewhere, better work-life balance for the same income. One even paid money to buy out their contract because they wanted out. Why isn't the Minister taking an interest in the lives of doctors that have chosen to leave or have had to leave Antigonish?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I believe Nova Scotians would be expecting me to treat all areas of the province equitably, Mr. Speaker. I can't believe the member from Inverness is advocating that I should take my position to disproportionately support constituents, Mr. Speaker. When I took my oath as the Minister of Health and Wellness, Mr. Speaker, I took an oath to serve all Nova Scotians in that regard. And as MLA, I serve my constituents in that respect, Mr. Speaker, just like every other member of this legislature. But I do not leverage my position, Mr. Speaker, to disproportionately benefit myself and my electoral pursuits.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, what's happening in Antigonish is disgraceful. I'm not asking the Minister to do something special for Antigonish. I'm asking him to consider why 10 doctors have left Antigonish in a year. What the Minister cannot deny is that these doctors have left because of the conditions created for them by this government and this Minister of Health. How could the Minister or anyone in this government refute that? Clearly, these doctors came to Antigonish because they wanted to be there. Then they uprooted their families and left. These are 10 doctors in one hospital that serves a predominantly rural area. Failing them is one thing, but failing to take an interest in why they had to leave is another example of this government ignoring the real state of health care, ignoring people it doesn't agree with, and ignoring people it doesn't want to hear from. Instead of defending the indefensible, will the minister do better for the people of Antigonish?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member in his information seems to forget to include the information about the specialists and family physicians that have been recruited and came to Antigonish, Mr. Speaker. The member fails to take into account the efforts that I've taken as an MLA to connect with the local recruitment team and coordinate, Mr. Speaker, through my constituency office when there are prospective physicians coming to town to visit, to have that meeting. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I believe there was a meeting just organized this week. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to attend one of those meetings, which resulted in a psychiatrist, Mr. Speaker, and an anaesthetist to come to Antigonish, Mr. Speaker. As part of attending those meetings, Mr. Speaker, just like every other MLA here, Mr. Speaker, has the opportunity to connect with recruiters and as part of their community to help support recruitment to their community.
The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Going through them like water, Mr. Speaker. The problem the minister's created in his constituency of Antigonish is impacting my people in the constituency of Inverness. We depend on the regional hospital in Antigonish. People are sent there from Inverness and Cheticamp. Our people have been going there for over 100 years. Dr. Pillay will eventually retire, and he was counting on Dr. McGilvery to keep the operating room going in Inverness. An opening remains for a surgeon in Antigonish. The minister's health authority has told Dr. McGilvery to apply, yet they have done nothing to address the issues which have forced her to resign. She has been working in the Valley doing locums, while there is vacancy for that too in Antigonish. What more can we take from the minister's actions and the health authorities? What more can we take from the ministers and health authorities' inaction other than that he doesn't care about her? And the people of Antigonish, Guysborough, Pictou, Richmond, and Inverness who need a surgeon have lost one they can count on.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to respond by highlighting to the member the many great healthcare professionals and surgeons that still perform surgeries, Mr. Speaker, in our communities, that people in the community can rely on those great physicians to continue to provide those supports. As I'd indicated previously, Mr. Speaker, recruitment efforts continue, and they've continued to be successful in Antigonish and the surrounding communities, Mr. Speaker. We've had several specialists, Mr. Speaker, come both in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker, and in Antigonish, for both specialists and family physicians, Mr. Speaker. These recruitment efforts will continue as we support the people of healthcare, not just in the community of Antigonish, not just in Inverness, not just the Strait, Mr. Speaker, but from one end of this province to the other.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Closures are mounting at the Eastern Shore Memorial Hospital in Sheet Harbour. Local residents are worried that not enough is being done to recruit doctors and nurses who want to practice in their community. We know that the department has offered locum and emergency physician incentive rates to other rural hospitals struggling to retain medical staff. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the minister if similar incentives are available to attract physicians to the Eastern Shore Memorial.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The programs and supports that we have available are generally targeted towards hard-to-fill positions and vacancies. Whether or not they've been leveraged or directly utilized at that site, I'm not certain, but I can certainly inquire and get the information.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the minister for that answer. While the Canada Student Loan Forgiveness Program for doctors and nurses helps attract medical professionals to other parts of our province, the Twin Oaks Memorial Hospital, the Eastern Shore Memorial Hospital, and the Musquodoboit Valley Memorial Hospital miss out on the support because, although these communities are certainly rural in character, they fall within the boundaries of HRM. While this rule is a federal one, Eastern Shore residents are calling on the provincial government to advocate for a solution that recognizes the unique situation of rural communities within the HRM. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Health and Wellness commit to writing to his federal counterpart in order to properly classify these hospitals as eligible for assistance?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I've already been in contact with representatives of the federal government on this very issue to have those conversations and to indicate the concerns so that they understand what the geographic environment and circumstances are within the province of Nova Scotia and how their policies disproportionately impact, or perhaps I should say unintentionally, I think, impact. So I have already became aware of that, Mr. Speaker, about a year ago, and have had conversations with representatives in the federal government.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, I know that everyone in this House is tired of me reminding them that the Cole Harbour Eastern Passage constituency is the only one in the province without a single-family doctor, and frankly, I'm tired of raising the issue myself. Last week, I notified the Minister of Health that several of the clinical nurse practitioner students who are about to graduate next month had applied for the job in my constituency as far back as December and had never heard from Human Resources. And I spoke with Human Resources and they said they would get on it. I called the students, they heard nothing. I called Human Resources again and they told me that the person who I've been dealing with is now off on maternity leave, and the person I spoke with again is now having to start from scratch. My question to the Minister of Health is, can he explain to me why this position, and perhaps others, is taking such a long time for students who want to apply for the job to even get a call back?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe what the member can highlight, we've had several conversations. The particular position that the member's referencing, I believe, was posted multiple occasions that the Health Authority had indicated they didn't have a matched candidate the first couple of times. So that's a very significant contribution to why it would take so long to fill that position.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, I've hired a lot of health professionals in my day, and it's hard to find a matched candidate if you don't bother responding to the people who've actually applied. These are 3 students who are graduating from Dalhousie University who never got a call back for any of the clinical nurse practitioner positions that are available that they applied for. I don't understand how this can continue to be going on. A year and a half ago, I had a clinical nurse practitioner ready to come to my constituency. I had a place located. You gave me the funding, and yet almost 2 years later, we're still dealing with this issue. So rather than going back and forth and me making all these phone calls, which frankly was the job of the Nova Scotia Health Authority, will the Minister of Health commit to meeting with me and the representatives of the Nova Scotia Health Authority together so that I don't have to come back in this House in the fall still talking about this issue?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't guarantee the outcome of a search for a particular position, but what I can advise the members, we've expanded the number of seats, Mr. Speaker, 25 additional nurse practitioner seats to ensure we have the supply of trained healthcare professionals, nurse practitioners, to meet the expansion that we are making, the continued investments in expanding primary care access, Mr. Speaker. I think we're somewhere in the vicinity of 130 healthcare professionals that have been hired as part of our collaborative teams across the province, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to make those investments to strengthen these primary care collaborative teams from one end of the province to the other. That's the work that we're committed to doing, Mr. Speaker, and this is one of those positions that the work is ongoing to complete.
The honourable member for Argyle-Barrington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Remember last fall, especially in Southwest Nova Scotia, a lot of the road maintenance in the area didn't get done because of the abysmal weather. It rained, it poured, it froze, it snowed, and guess what? The grading didn't get done. Guess what? The roads are almost dry in Southwest Nova Scotia. Yarmouth County has dry roads. And you know what I get called? They call my office and they keep asking me, where are the graders? Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Transportation go find a grader and send it to Yarmouth County so that we can get our darn roads graded once and for all?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate Member Opposite for that impassioned rendition of, I'm sure, one of Shakespeare's famous plays. the folks in the folks in Yarmouth County, like all Nova Scotians, are extremely important to us. We have 2,250 dedicated people across this province. We're continually investing in new equipment, including graders, Mr. Speaker, across the area. But I'll certainly undertake to see in the regional what exactly we can do to help the members' blood pressure.
We're going to conclude at 2:52. The honourable member for Argyle-Barrington. 2:52. We have lots of time. The honourable member for Argyle-Barrington.
I got a whole other one. Let me talk to you about bridges. The bridges, I tell you, Mr. Speaker, we've had a problem with beavers, and the beavers continue to block up all of the culverts. And I wanted to know, and maybe this is a discussion between you and the member for Lands and Forests, who's responsible for this? Who's the one that's supposed to clear these culverts out so that water will flow and things won't flood? So, Mr. Speaker, my second question to the minister: who's responsible for beavers?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it provides me the opportunity to illustrate and to accentuate the importance of beavers to Canada. The land was actually founded on beavers. They are doing well. They're back, and
the time allotted for oral questions put by members